day 728 of the Trump administration and day 27 of the partial government shutdown. We'll have much more on the longest shutdown ever in just a moment, but we begin with some significant breaking news coming from BuzzFeed News within the past hour or so. BuzzFeed News posted a story that says President Trump directed Michael Cohen to lie to Congress. Quote, President Donald Trump directed his longtime attorney, Michael Cohen, to lie to Congress about negotiations to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, according to two federal law enforcement officials involved in an investigation of the matter. Trump also supported a plan set up by Cohen to visit Russia during the presidential campaign in order to personally meet President Vladimir Putin and jumpstart the tower negotiations. Make it happen, the sources said Trump told Cohen. And even as Trump told the public he had no business deals with Russia, the sources said Trump and his children, Ivanka and Donald Trump Jr., received regular, detailed updates about the real estate development from Cohen, whom they put in charge of the project. We'll have more with our panel in just a moment, but first I'm joined by one of the two reporters on this story, Anthony Cormier, an investigative reporter with BuzzFeed News. Anthony, some very strong reporting here by you and your colleagues. Tell me how you came about this information and what you've learned tonight.
So we spoke with two federal law enforcement officials who are read into the sort of inner workings of the Trump Tower Moscow investigation, and they relayed this story to us as it emerged in the last couple of weeks that Michael Cohen was directed by the President of the United States to lie to Congress. They're not basing this solely on Michael Cohen's statement to the Office of Special Counsel, but they are basing it on reams of documentary evidence and witness interviews that preceded Michael Cohen sitting down with Mr. Mueller. When Michael walked in and spoke to the Mueller's team, he then sort of put that investigation over the top. He put the cherry on top of it and said, look, yes, this happened. This is true. This is how it went down.
It's incredible reporting. We haven't obviously been able to confirm this ourselves at NBC, so we're relying on your reporting. But it is truly some incredible things in here, including the detail and frequency, Anthony, with which it appears that Donald Trump and/or Ivanka Trump and Donald Trump Jr. were in fact briefed, and the degree to which Donald Trump was involved in this, despite simultaneously denying during the campaign and subsequently that he had meaningful dealings with Russia.
Right. He has said again and again on the campaign trail that he has no business with Russia, nothing to see here. When in fact, behind the scenes, he was encouraging Mr. Cohen to set up a meeting overseas in Russia with Vladimir Putin. He was encouraging to pursue the deal, and he was made aware of sort of granular details about the project, what it would look like, where it would be, what the land, how they were going to acquire the land. So he was definitely read into this project to an extent that he has not admitted on the campaign trail.
And of course, for anybody who understands the relationship between Donald Trump and his children, particularly the business relationship, the detail in your story discusses the extent to which Donald Trump's kids were involved in this thing, to the extent that Ivanka Trump was involved in picking an architect. She was going to run the spa at this hotel. She had disagreements with Michael Cohen about how far and how things were going, despite the fact that, again, the kids gave out statements that said they were only peripherally involved.
Right. I think that is a thing that has emerged as a pattern, I suppose, in this administration and during that campaign. That I think you could see that if you look at some of the great reporting by the New York Times on the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting, where first said, no, we didn't know anything about it, and then later it emerges that, oh, by the way, yeah, we did. I think that sort of thing is happening here, right, where the story is changing, and it's slowly changing over time. It's well, we didn't have anything to do with it, and then it's, well, the negotiations ended in January, and then, oh, BuzzFeed got some documents, and yeah, they were negotiating through June, and now we're beginning to learn that the family, or at least the president and his Ivanka and Donald Jr. were read in, right? They knew they knew it was happening. They knew it was going on. They were aware of the progress here.
The story keeps changing could be the tagline of this administration. There was a piece in your story that caught my attention, and that was that Michael Cohen appeared to be negotiating progress toward a face-to-face meeting in Russia between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin that was supposed to take place after the July 2016 Republican National Convention.
Right. He told him, quote, make it happen. We've previously published details of text messages in which Michael Cohen and an associate, Felix Sater, were discussing this trip to an economic forum, who Michael could meet, when the president was going to come, who the president could meet. So we knew that this was on the table. Our sources helped explain to us that this wasn't Michael acting solo. He wasn't freelancing. The president candidate at the time wanted this to take place and was actively encouraging it to happen.
And we have a response from Lanny Davis, who is Michael Cohen's legal and communications advisor, about this BuzzFeed story, in which he says, out of respect for Mr. Mueller and the Office of the Special Counsel's investigation, Mr. Cohen declined to respond to the questions asked by the reporters, and so do I. Anthony, thank you for your reporting. Anthony Cormier from BuzzFeed News. I want to bring in our leadoff panel for a Thursday night. Philip Rucker, Pulitzer Prize-winning White House bureau chief for The Washington Post. Barbara McQuade, former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, and Emily Jane Fox, senior reporter for Vanity Fair, who also happens to be the author of Born Trump: Inside America's First Family. We have exactly the right people to talk about this. First, I want to start with you, Phil. You have reached out to the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, for a response. What have you got?
That's right. His response is sort of a non-denial denial. He's basically saying, look, if you believe Michael Cohen, I have the Brooklyn Bridge to sell you, which, of course, he doesn't. But that overlooks the fact that the BuzzFeed reporting is not based on the word of Michael Cohen. It's based on, documents and other pieces of evidence, as you and the guests were just explaining a few minutes ago. But clearly the White House or the president's legal team, rather, is trying to downplay the significance of this. But it's a very important development. And it directly, if it's true, it directly implicates the president in a crime.
Barbara, let's talk about that particular part of things. There are a few things happening here because Michael Cohen, according to this reporting, did things and had conversations that are contrary to what he actually testified about in Congress, in terms of the number of times he discussed the Moscow Project with Donald Trump, in terms of what, if anything, the Trump administration or Donald Trump contributed to his testimony. It continues to look very serious for Michael Cohen. What does this look like to you for Donald Trump?
I think if this report is true, it's very serious for Donald Trump as well. As we heard, this is not just based on the word of Michael Cohen, but the reporting says it's based on witness testimony of other witnesses as well as documents. That's the kind of corroboration a prosecutor would look for. I think that if these allegations are true, there are potential crimes of suborning perjury, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. And this is consistent with a theory that Attorney General William Barr has, where even a president could be charged with obstruction of justice. This is not his discretion to direct those under his supervision to stand down on investigations, investigate one thing but not another. This is directing someone to conceal evidence.
I want to underscore this point so it doesn't get lost in all of the many details, the myriad details in this story. The key takeaway here is that Donald Trump may have, or is alleged to have, given Michael Cohen instruction on what he was supposed to say about something that happened between Donald Trump and Michael Cohen and this project in Russia.
Yes, and which makes it a serious crime under the criminal code as a crime. I also think there's a very strong argument to be made that this is a high crime or misdemeanor for which impeachment may be a possibility. And, it lines up with what Robert Mueller wrote in the sentencing memo from Michael Cohen. It talked in there about how he had circulated his proposed testimony before Congress with others. It did not disclose who those others might be. But when you think about others who've testified before Congress, like Donald Trump Jr., and now if he was taking directions from President Trump himself, this new reporting is consistent with that statement in the sentencing memo.
Emily Jane Fox, you are an expert on the Trump family and their finances. And as Ari Melber pointed out to me earlier today, with all these people denying that they knew about something else someone else may have been involved in. This is not General Motors. This is not a company with tens of thousands of employees. It's hard to believe that Donald Trump wouldn't have known what Eric or Don Jr. or Ivanka were up to. But this reporting indicates that Ivanka and Donald Jr. were both very involved in the Moscow project.
Because they're very involved in any project that happens within the Trump organization. As you just said, it's not a Fortune 500 company.
Right.
This is a tiny mom and pop shop run out of an office in the apartment building in which they grew up. This is very much a family office, and the family office is very small. So Ivanka and Don Jr. and Eric have been involved in all of these aspects in all of the hotels and buildings that they open. It would be very difficult for me to believe that all of a sudden on this one project that was due to make the family a tremendous amount of money,
right,
that they would just say, oh, you know what, this one we're going to let go to Michael Cohen, which is now it's a person they say, well, we didn't really have that much to do with. So it's either one or the other.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.